When my daughter forced my wife and me out of our own home and had us placed in a care facility under false pretenses, she had no idea that 31 years ago I had hidden something inside the walls of that house. Something that would change everything. My name is not important. What matters is that I spent 43 years building a life in Oakville, Ontario. I worked as a structural engineer for the city of Hamilton for most of my career, and when I retired at 64, my wife Margaret and I finally had time to simply breathe. We had our home on Lakeshore Road, a 1970s brick two-story that we had renovated twice over the decades, our garden, our routine, and each other. That was enough. That was more than enough. Our daughter Vivian was our only child. We had tried for more children after her, but it was not meant to be, and so we poured everything into her. Piano lessons in Burlington, university at Western, a wedding at a vineyard in Niagara-on-the-Lake that cost us more than I care to admit. We were proud of her. We told ourselves we were proud of her even when the calls became less frequent, even when Christmas visits shortened from a week to 2 days, even when she started referring to our home as that old place with a tone I could not quite name. Her husband Derek was a financial advisor in Mississauga. He wore good suits and spoke in confident sentences, the kind of man who made you feel slightly foolish for not having thought of something before he mentioned it. He had an opinion on everything, our neighborhood, our investment choices, the fact that we still used a financial planner we had trusted for 20 years. He called our planner outdated. He offered to manage our portfolio himself. Margaret politely declined. I watched something flicker behind his eyes when she said no. The trouble started the autumn I turned 68. Margaret had been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis 2 years earlier, and while she managed well most days, there were stretches in the colder months when her hands and knees flared badly. Vivian began calling more often that fall, which should have felt like a gift. Instead, it felt like an inspection. She asked questions. How were we managing the stairs? Had we looked into bungalows? Had we spoken to anyone about power of attorney? She mentioned, casually, that Derek had some expertise in elder care planning. She used the phrase aging in place the way people use phrases they have recently looked up. I answered her questions patiently. Margaret answered them with a politeness that I recognized as controlled irritation. In November, they drove up on a Saturday and sat us down at our own kitchen table. Derek had a folder. He laid out what he called a transition plan. He said the house was too large for 2 people, that the equity tied up in it was significant, and that a senior living community in Burlington he had already toured would give us amenities and care that would improve our quality of life. He said quality of life the way people say it when they mean something else entirely. I told him we were not moving. Margaret said nothing, which for her was the loudest possible agreement with me. Vivian looked at her hands. Derek closed his folder and said, "We just want what's best for you both." He said it like a door closing. They left before dinner. I watched their car back out of the driveway and I felt something I could not name. Not quite fear. Something older than fear. Over the following weeks, things shifted in ways I noticed but could not yet prove. Derek called twice asking about the property deed. He framed it as helping us get our paperwork organized. I told him our paperwork was already organized. Vivian emailed Margaret a brochure for the Burlington facility. It was glossy and full of photographs of white-haired people laughing in sunlit common rooms. Margaret put it in the recycling without comment. Then in January, 3 days before our 47th wedding anniversary, Vivian called to say she was coming to stay for a few days. She said she was worried about us with the cold weather. She said Derek might come too, later in the week. I said, of course. Come, we'll make the guest room up. Margaret made her favorite soup. We set the table nicely. We were still, at that point, parents. They arrived together, not separately as Vivian had said. They had luggage that suggested more than a few days. And they had, though I would not learn this until later, a document. The first evening was almost normal. We ate dinner, opened a bottle of Ontario Riesling, talked about nothing consequential, but I noticed Derek kept looking at the bookshelves in my study, the way someone looks at something they are already planning to move. And Vivian was too cheerful, in the effortful way of someone managing their own anxiety. The next morning I came downstairs to find Derek on the phone in my kitchen speaking quietly. He stopped when he heard me on the stairs. He said it was a client. He smiled the way people smile when they are hoping you did not hear anything specific. 2 days later, while Margaret was resting in the afternoon, her joints had been bad that week, the January cold settling into her bones the way it always did. Vivian sat me down in the living room. She had the document. It was a continuing power of attorney for property, and it had my signature on it, except I had never signed it. I stared at it for a long time. My handwriting, or close enough to it that I felt the ground shift under me, Vivian said a doctor had assessed us both and had concerns. She said this was to protect us. She said Derek had been helping manage things on our behalf already. She used the word already as though time had passed that I had not been present for. I asked her what she meant. She said we were moving to the Burlington residence at the end of the week. She said it had already been arranged. She said the house would be listed in the spring. She said all of this in a voice that was trying to sound gentle and instead sounded rehearsed. I stood up. I told her I did not sign that document. I told her I wanted to see the assessment she was referring to. I told her I was going to call our lawyer. Vivian looked at Derek, who had appeared in the doorway, and something passed between them that told me they had prepared for this reaction. Derek said the lawyer I was thinking of had retired. He said our accounts had been consolidated for simplicity. He said, and this is the sentence I will never stop hearing, Dad. The decision has already been made. I am not a man who shouts. I have not shouted in anger perhaps a dozen times in my life. I did not shout then either. I looked at my daughter, who was looking at the floor, and I understood with a clarity that was almost physical that she had crossed a line she would not be able to uncross. And then I thought of Margaret, still upstairs, resting, her hands wrapped around a heating pad, not knowing any of this yet. They moved us out 4 days later. Vivian packed a bag for each of us. She packed the wrong things. She forgot Margaret's medications and had to be called twice from the facility. She forgot the anniversary card I kept in my nightstand. She forgot, or chose to forget, the person her mother and I had tried to raise her to be. The Burlington facility was not unkind. The staff were pleasant. The rooms were clean, but it was not our home, and Margaret knew it. And I watched something in her face go quiet in a way that frightened me more than anything Derek had said. What Vivian and Derek did not know, what no one knew except a man named Robert Calloway, a retired solicitor in Hamilton who had been my closest friend since we were both 26 years old, was what I had done in the spring of 1994. That was the year I renovated my study. I had done most of the work myself, a habit from years of working with contractors and learning what things actually required, a professional in what things only seemed to. During that renovation, I had opened a section of the interior wall beside the built-in shelving to run new electrical, and before I closed that wall, I placed something inside it, a sealed envelope. Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter, signed and dated in front of 2 witnesses, Robert and his wife Patricia, describing in full the contents of my will, the location of an original copy, held with a separate solicitor, and a clear statement that any power of attorney purported to bear my signature after the date of that letter, and executed without my physical presence and verbal confirmation to Robert Calloway personally, was to be considered fraudulent. I had written it on an impulse, born of something I cannot fully explain, except to say that I was 41 years old. I had just watched a colleague lose everything to a family dispute, and I was a structural engineer who believed in redundancy. In load-bearing systems, you never trust a single point of support. You build backups. You build them before you need them. I had told no one except Robert, not even Margaret. The facility allowed me to use the common room phone in the evenings. On the 3rd night, while Margaret was sleeping and Vivian had not visited, I called Robert. He answered on the 2nd ring. I told him everything. He was quiet for a moment in the way he had always been quiet, when he was thinking, not when he was at a loss. Then he said, I've been waiting for you to call me about something like this for about 15 years. He said he would contact the solicitor who held the original will. He said he knew a family law attorney in Oakville who had handled elder financial abuse cases. He said I should write down everything I could remember about the document Vivian had shown me, every detail about Derek's involvement, every date. He said, George, they made a mistake. I said, what mistake? He said, they forgot that you build things to last. It took 11 days. I know that sounds like a short time for something this serious. And I want to be honest with you, those 11 days were not easy. Margaret developed a chest cold in the 2nd week, and there were 2 nights I sat beside her bed in that facility and felt a fear that had nothing to do with the house or the money or any of it. She recovered, but I aged in those 11 days in a way I had not in the previous decade. On the 12th day, Robert arrived at the facility with a lawyer named Catherine Marsh and, separately, 2 officers from the Halton Regional Police. The power of attorney had been forensically examined by then. The signature was determined to be a forgery, close, skilled, but not mine, under detailed analysis. The physician's assessment Vivian had referenced turned out to involve a doctor Derek had a prior relationship with through a referral network. The financial account changes Derek had made were documented. The original will, held by a separate solicitor whose name and address I had placed in that envelope in the wall in 1994, confirmed that the house was mine and Margaret's unconditionally, that no provisions existed for early transfer, and that any transfer made under duress or fraudulent documentation was explicitly contested in advance. Derek was charged. I will not list everything because some of it is still before the courts, but the charges included fraud and forgery. He was released on bail. Vivian was not charged criminally, but she had signed documents attesting to the validity of the power of attorney, and that has its own legal consequences that Catherine Marsh is still working through on our behalf. We came home in February, 1 month and 4 days after we had been taken out. The house was cold because the thermostat had been turned down. There were boxes in my study. Derek had apparently started preparing for the listing. The built-in bookshelves were intact. I walked to the section of wall beside them, and I pressed my hand flat against the drywall, feeling the seam where I had patched it in 1994, and I thought about the person I was at 41 who had trusted something he could not have explained and put it inside a wall and waited 31 years for it to matter. Margaret stood in the kitchen doorway watching me. She asked what I was doing. I told her there was something in the wall. I told her all of it. The envelope, Robert, the letter, the witnesses, all of it that I had kept for 31 years. She was quiet in the way she is quiet when she is processing something rather than reacting to it. Then she said, "You never told me." I said, "I didn't want you to worry that I thought it might be necessary." She said, "And now?" I said, "Now I'm glad I did." She walked over and stood beside me with her hand on the wall next to mine. She said, 31 years. I said, "Redundancy. You never trust a single point of support." She looked at me for a moment, and then she laughed, quietly, the way she laughs at things that are not quite funny, and not quite not. That laugh. I had missed that laugh in ways I had not let myself measure. I want to say something about Vivian, because I think it would be dishonest not to. She is our daughter. That fact does not change and has never changed, and there are mornings when I feel that in a way that has no good words for it. I believe Derek's influence was significant. I believe she told herself a version of this story in which she was helping us, in which the end justified the arrangement, in which parents who are aging cannot be trusted to know what they need. I believe she was wrong in every direction, and that she made choices she will live with. We have not spoken since February. I do not know what the path forward looks like. I know it is a long one, and that some things, once broken, heal into a different shape than they started. What I know more clearly is this. The law in Ontario, and in every province in this country, takes elder financial abuse seriously. The Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario Network exists. The Advocacy Centre for the Elderly in Toronto takes calls. If someone is attempting to take control of your finances, your home, or your medical decisions without your genuine consent, even if that someone is family, especially if that someone is family, there are people who will listen and who have seen it before and who know what to do. You do not have to manage it quietly. You do not have to be reasonable about it in the way that people mean when they say reasonable and mean silent. And if you are younger than I was in 1994, or the same age, or older, think about redundancy. Think about what you are building and what happens if one point of support fails. Tell someone you trust. Write it down. Put it somewhere you believe in. Not because you are afraid, but because you are a person who builds things to last. Margaret is sitting in the garden as I write this. It is April now, and the lilacs beside the fence are almost open. She has a cup of tea, and she is reading, and her hands are giving her a reasonably gentle day. The house is warm. The thermostat is set where we like it. The boxes from my study are gone. Some things were taken from us that I will not pretend we have fully recovered. But we are here, we are in our home, and somewhere behind that wall, there is an empty space where a sealed envelope sat for 31 years, waiting to matter. It mattered. If you have ever had someone in your family treat you like a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected, you are not alone in that. And if you have ever wondered whether it is worth the effort to protect yourself before you think you need protecting, it always is. Thank you for being here with me today. If this story reached something in you, leave a comment below and tell me what you thought. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, please share it. We will be back with another story very soon.